Hello and welcome back to the No Dig Norfolk Gardener, and this video is October's Postbag. Now, first of all, I'd like to thank you all for the questions that you've sent us. We do appreciate them, and over the coming months we will try to answer as many of your questions as we can on the monthly Postbag. The first question that we had sent in to us is, what are the most important jobs that one should be doing during the autumn-winter period now that the weather is starting to turn? Good question. There are many things that one could be doing, but I would say, especially during the early part of autumn, so now October leading into November, when you get days like this as it is today, is to try and work on those jobs that you want to do. So structural jobs, if you need to paint the shed, if you need to do repairs to the greenhouse or the polytunnel, so that by the time you get to next spring, they're all completed and you're ready to go. As for your plants, well, for your plants, it's keeping them in good condition and stopping any diseases or mold appearing. And one of the things that I always do, these cabbages here, these leaves here aren't doing the plant any good at all. The slugs have had bits and pieces of them, and if you keep the plant nice and tidy, then less diseases will take place. These leaves really aren't doing these plants any good anymore. That's not photosynthesizing. So get those off, and what you will find is that as you do that, they have a bit more room in which to grow. These leaves don't do them any favours at all. And there's still lots of lovely green leaf in and around the plant that will bring this cabbage, in this case, onto its final harvest. You can see that it's already starting to heart up nicely, so that's doing really well. Also, of course, when you are inspecting your plants and showing that they're all right, I talk about it most months, but do keep an eye on your weeds. You can see that in here there are very few weeds, partly because these have such big leaves that they stop anything really germinating. There's just the odd one or two. But where this cover has been, and we haven't actually got here for a little while, these are getting quite large. So let's get these out and into the weed bucket. And in that way, they are not going to flower, they will not produce seeds, and they won't be growing here anymore. We're quite windy here, or at least we are during the autumn months and the winter months, partly because we're only about 8 or 9 miles from the coast, and the wind tends to go this way rather than up and down the garden. It's coming across the garden. We had a bit of a stormy night, and you can see the effect it's had on these plants. They're quite tall plants. These are purple sprouting broccoli. Now, the winds weren't strong enough to actually uplift these out of the ground, and I have seen strong winds do it. But what it has done is to serve as a reminder to me that I need to stake the taller plants so that they don't rock about. Because every time they rock about in the wind, it breaks all the little roots, especially the ones, the little ones that do a lot of the feeding for it. It's not so much the big main root, but those really tiny roots that are on there, they're the ones that take up all the nutrients and the water. So there's the first 2 plants done. All I've done is put a cane into the ground, and then I've just tied some twine around the plant. Don't do it too tight so that it actually cuts into the plant. Give it some room so that it can, because it's going to grow some more as yet. That stem is going to get thicker. Remember, these won't come to a harvest until Rudolph, probably very late this year and into January. And the claret, of course, they are an April harvest, so they're going to be in the ground quite a while. They're going to grow quite a bit as yet before we see a harvest. As these plants do grow taller, and they will grow taller, then we'll probably need to stick a taller cane in as they get up to here, because they will get up to about this height. They do get up to about 5 foot so tall. And the other thing that I think is quite important for you to do, basically because you want to be able to eat, is to actually make sure you keep an eye on your plants when they're coming to harvest. I do see on quite a lot of videos that I watch where people are letting their vegetables go over so that the harvest is not so good. And you need to come out here and check your vegetables so that you get them at the optimum time. Now if you look down here, an example here is this cauliflower. Now this is round about the right time of the year that it's going to flower. That is not ready to pick yet. It's not very far away. Once all these leaves open out like so, then that cauliflower will be at its maximum size and you can harvest it. While it's still turned in a bit, it is actually still growing. If you don't harvest at the right time and it's too late, the white curds will start to separate and then they will rise to flower. Even if you catch them before they go to flower and they've separated, the cauliflower no longer tastes as good. It goes quite bitter and you've lost your harvest. So do come out periodically. I now know that this is at this stage. I'm coming out every day to check it. Certainly every other day you want to be coming out to check this. You've spent so long growing and nurturing these vegetables in your vegetable beds that it would be a real shame if you didn't get the harvest because you didn't come out to check them. This autumn giant I sowed back in end of May, I believe it was, end of May. And we're now in October. And that is now going to harvest for us. It's the right time of year. October, November is when autumn giant harvests. So that's literally been in the ground June, July, August, September, October. 5 months I've been growing that. So let's make sure we enjoy that harvest. I grew Savoy cabbage, red cabbage and purple sprouting broccoli from seed. But all have succumbed to various bugs and will not give me the harvest that I had hoped. There are companies on the internet selling veg plugs. Do you think I would have any joy planting them in the same plot now? Well, if they're trying to sell you those plants now at this time of the year, for me I would say no. I would not buy those plants, not at all, and put them out. You can see there are purple sprouting broccoli, and I sowed that seed back in June, beginning of June, and those plants went into the ground during July, and they're now at that stage. If you put plug plants in there now, the weather is going to be very cold soon. They're not ever going to come to a harvest, in my opinion. So I would say no. I wouldn't buy those plug plants. Cut your losses. It didn't work this year. We've had things that haven't worked this year. Just in this patch here, we did have some swede. Never came to anything. So I had those up. They literally curled up and died. I think, how hot it was, we just couldn't get enough water into them this year when they were planted out, and eventually we lost them. Things like that do happen from year to year. Last year we had a good swede harvest. This year it hasn't happened. Equally with our kale. We sowed our kale, which is just the other side there, and they never got going and they've succumbed to slug damage. I think it looks like slug damage anyway. They've been eaten by something and we're not going to have kale. But we've got lots of things in the ground that we've managed to successfully grow. We'll be able to feed ourselves with lovely fresh vegetables, and there will always be winners and losers in most years. If anybody watching out there has bought plug plants at this time of the year of things like purple sprouting broccoli, cabbage, kale, things like that, and you have transplanted them during October, do let us know in the comments below if you've brought them onto a good harvest. Certainly myself and Mrs. W have never done it, but like I said earlier, I can't see how you're ever going to get to harvest from those plants if you put them in the ground now. There are of course some things that you can plant out into your garden now. We have some pak choy seedlings that we are going to be popping out into the ground. We're also going to be growing some in the polytunnel, but we are going to put some out into the ground. They're quite hardy and they will give you a harvest. They harvest within about anywhere between 40 and 60 days. If they had some spinach that was sown towards the back end of August, which was when we looked to sow ours, then you could buy those and you could pop those into your plot now. It is getting very borderline now. You don't want to leave it much later. You want to get those in the ground now so that they can get their roots down and be ready to give you a harvest as we turn into spring. If you see that there are some plug plants of spring cabbages or winter greens, they too can go into the ground now. In fact, again, much like the spinach, we're really approaching the time where they need to go in the ground. October is the time. They need time just to get their roots down before the really, really cold weather sets in. But of course, depending on where you're watching from, if you're already experiencing cold weather, or if you're likely to experience it as we get through the second half of October, which you very often can the further north you live in the UK, then it may already be too late for you to plant those out. Now, our final question for this particular video is, can you tell me exactly which plants followed your first plantings? Yes, I can. What we'll do is we'll just quickly go around from bed to bed and I'll tell you what was there, and obviously you'll be able to see exactly what is now there. So if we start with bed 1, these are the autumn and winter harvesting carrots, and before these were sown we had onions and spring onions that were overwintered last year, and we harvested back in April and May. They'd finished their harvest by about the second week of June, and then we sowed these carrots into here. Now here in bed 2, this was our legume bed for the first plantings. Here was where our broad beans were, and here was where our peas were. And because legumes are good fixers of nitrogen, and it's widely believed that they will leave some nitrogen behind in the soil when you harvest them, especially if you leave the roots in there, because we just tend to cut ours off at the bottom and we leave the roots in there, then it's really good to follow those with leafy greens such as brassicas, which is exactly what we've done. You can see these are looking really quite healthy. Underneath the cloche there, where the broad beans were, are now sprouts. And then where the peas were, we have cauliflower triumphant. That should harvest for us during December and January. This is cauliflower autumn giant. That's coming to its harvest now, and will harvest between now and November. And then we had cabbage Ormskirk. That will harvest anytime from mid-November through December and through January. And then next to that are some Romanesco, which I have to confess I don't yet know when that's going to harvest. I keep looking at it and I think it's actually starting to get ready to do something, because the leaves are starting to turn in, but as yet no cauliflower. Now in bed 3, originally there were second early Charlotte potatoes in here, and I was going to put leeks, but actually the potatoes didn't come to harvest when I would normally expect them to, and it was actually right at the very end of July, beginning of August, when we took the final harvest of those potatoes. Originally I'd planned for leeks to go in here, but that didn't happen because I wanted to plant the leeks out during July, but not late July. Ideally I like to get my leeks in the ground right at the end of June, certainly within the first 2 weeks of July. That didn't happen here. Next door, they were the kale I was talking about a bit earlier. They went out into the ground, but you can see they've just never ever really got going, and something's certainly been eating those. And then next door to those kale, we originally had in there Calibres, a variety called Marathon, and they were followed by a variety of cauliflower called Snow March, and later Ellesmere. And actually, before the Calibres went in there, we actually had our leeks there. They were still there last March. So if you think about it, really this year, that strip of land has actually seen 3 plantings. Now, in this bare piece here, I did say in one of the previous questions the fact that we lost our swede. Pretty much like the kale, it never really got going. I do think it was the really hot weather, and we just really didn't have enough water to water these plants adequately. I think, if I remember rightly, Mrs. W, I think our water butts, and we have many dotted about the garden, but we'd used all our water by sort of mid-July, hadn't we? And yeah, there was no water left until we actually got the rains that eventually arrived at the beginning of September. We have had harvests out of here, and plenty of them. Earlier in the year there was celery in here, there was also spring onions. We then had a crop of Calibres. We also, next to those, grew some kohlrabi, which we really enjoyed. That's the first time we've had those, and we really enjoyed that, so that's something we're actually going to be growing again. And we've also had some lovely harvests of pak choy. Bed 4, this was where we grew our main crop potatoes, and virtually all of the bed was taken up apart from the strip at the end where you can see our parsnips are. Now, parsnips are a really long season growing crop. They're one of the few crops that we grow that are in the ground all through the growing season. So the seed was sown back in the spring in April, and you probably saw in our last video where Mrs. W bullied me to harvest one, even though I've said she can't have them until the frost has been on them. But she made me dig one up, I promise you.
I did it.
But yeah, they'll be there. They'll sit there happily until next March. So plenty of food to come from there. But when the potatoes were finished, and we had those out during the latter part of July, we then replaced them with a planting of Calibres Marathon, and they will be harvesting this month during October. We also put some, what I thought at the time were going to be winter green cabbages. I'd obviously mixed the labels up because they are actually Winter King, and that's why they're planted really, really close. It's a bit too close for that variety. It should have been more at 18-inch spacing. They're actually at 12-inch spacings. And then in this part, this is where we put our purple sprouting broccoli, and we've got the variety Rudolph, and we have the variety Claret. Now here in bed 5, this was predominantly the allium bed, and most of it was, or I would say half of it was taken up by onions, and then we had garlic, shallots, and that was where the spinach was. When the spinach had finished, we then replaced that with our celeriac, and they're looking really quite good. In fact, one of those I think I might even harvest today because it's looking so good. And then where the garlic and shallots were, this was where we put our leeks. Now, somebody did say to me that you shouldn't plant leeks where you planted other alliums. Now, I don't know how true that is. It was the first that I'd heard of that. But what I would say is that the leeks are looking really good. They're growing nice and strongly. As I said earlier, I originally had planned to plant them where our Charlotte potatoes were, but the harvest was much later than I would normally expect it to happen, whereas the garlic and the shallots were out of here by the end of June. So I was able to then follow that on with these leeks. Now at the moment I aren't seeing any particular signs of disease or anything bad on the leeks. But if you've heard that before, that leeks should not follow any other member of the allium family, do let us know down in the comments below. And do let us know the reasons why that is, because then I should look out for that. I sincerely hope that they are going to be alright, because we do love our leeks in this family. I would like to thank you all very much for your questions. We do really appreciate them, and if you haven't sent us a question yet and there's something you'd like to know and that you think we might be able to answer for you, then around about late October on the community channel tab I shall put it out there that we're looking for your questions for the November post bag. So if you've got something you'd like us to answer for you, then jot it down and send it over to us. If you're watching this video and a question has popped into your head, then do leave it in the comments below for this video, and I'll just pick that up, just put on there that it's a question that you'd like answered, and I shall write that down as I do in my book, and we'll answer that for you over the coming month's post bag. Well, it's been a lovely day, hasn't it, Poppy? The sun's shining, so you're out for a change today, aren't you? You don't like the howling winds and the rain. But from myself and Poppy, we shall catch you on the next video.